Well, he is the founder of Revolver News. His name is Darren Beattie. He's also a former speechwriter for President Donald J. Trump. He's got a new book out, The January 6th Report, the report of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. And Darren joins us right on the line. Darren, thank you so much for being here, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. All right, well, I guess I'll start with this because you're the perfect person to ask this, right? What were your thoughts on the January 6th final report that just came out?
I mean, it was a joke, and very, very predictable joke due to the composition of the committee itself. I mean, once you know who comprised the committee, it's a foregone conclusion what it would be. And I'm not just saying that because the members of the committee were deeply partisan. In fact, it's funny, the nominal Republicans are even more anti-Trump than the Democrats. So it's a bipartisan committee of Republicans who hate Trump and Democrats who hate Trump. But it goes beyond that, because the chair of the committee, Benny Thompson, actually in his personal capacity, launched a lawsuit against Trump and several others pertaining to January 6th. This lawsuit laid out a whole theory of the case of January 6th. And that theory of the case, which came like very, very shortly after the second impeachment of Trump, is basically the finding of the J6 committee. And so if anyone's concerned with a little concept called conflict of interest, having someone chair the committee who's already launched a personal lawsuit with a theory of the case already advanced for a committee that's supposed to examine an issue afresh and objectively, it's already doomed to fail from that perspective.
Well, so let's just get your opinions though on January 6th, and let's just say, for hypothetically speaking, that everybody on that committee was biased towards Donald Trump. Let's assume you're 100% correct.
Biased against.
Yeah, right. That's what I just said. Let's just assume, for argument's sake, you're 100% right. What are your opinions on January 6th? And do you feel like Donald Trump deserves any responsibility? I'm sure you would agree with me. Let's start where we hopefully we can agree. There was violence that day, and I'm sure you don't, you didn't want to see that happen, right?
No, I didn't want to see that. I mean, again, so the question is, how did the violence take place?
Mm-hmm.
What were the conditions that were put in place that allowed for this peaceful rally, what should have been a peaceful rally, to turn into a riot? How did that happen? And again, the full story of this, unfortunately, runs outside the scope of the conversation. I'd encourage people to go and get the Skyhorse version of the J6 report, because there are other versions that come out just reinforcing the establishment narrative. You got to get the Skyhorse version if you want to hear the counterpoints, or go to Revolver News and read it. But in short, there are a number of really peculiar things. One thing that I find peculiar is it would be one thing if the Capitol had the same amount of security as any other day on January 6th. That in and of itself would be weird. January 6th is a day that is known to, be a controversial day. There was going to be a certification proceeding in Congress. Trump was there going to speak about the stolen election. There was going to be a huge crowd there. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to know that this might be a day for enhanced security. Mm-hmm. But not only was there not enhanced security, not only was there, not ordinary security, there is uniquely non-existent security on that day. And that's, just the first step of it. The second step is, how did the riot actually take place? And this gets into some of the territory that is extremely explosive, and that a lot of what I would call the regime media, the sort of the intel infiltrated media, really went nuts when I first reported on this at Revolver News, is that so there's really poor security. Then the second step is seeing, was there any advanced knowledge that something might go down beyond the mere common sense that if you have a huge crowd in those conditions, something could happen?
So yeah, go ahead.
And the answer to that is yes, along a number of dimensions. So we've since learned that the most quote unquote insurrection-y aspects of January 6th are imputed to a handful of so-called militia groups, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and so
Hmm.
forth. And what we've learned through the course of the January 6th trials and Oath Keepers trials and other things, and reporting not just from my organization, but the New York Times and others, is that these militia groups were subject of extreme infiltration. They had tons of informants in there going up to the very highest levels. In fact, in the Oath Keepers militia group, it was revealed recently that the number 2 guy was an FBI informant. And so, let's look at the word itself, informant. If they had all of these informants in there, then they must have been informed in advance. And that adds an additional layer of suspicions to say, if they had advanced information of all of this stuff going on, it only reinforces the question as to why they refuse to have any reasonable measures of security on that day. And that's not even talking about the active
So I
provocateurs,
agree. So I
which I'm
agree with
happy
you.
to talk about, but
Yeah.
I'll be quiet for now and
Sure.
let you respond to
Well,
that.
no, if you're just joining us, he is Darren Beattie. He's got a new book out, former speechwriter for President Donald Trump. So, Darren, I agree with you. There were obviously some major security issues there that can't happen again. I agree with you 100% on that. But I have to ask you this. I know you're a loyalist to Donald Trump. I know that. You worked for the man. I get that. You don't hold any responsibility for Donald Trump months leading up to it saying that Democrats cheated and Joe Biden stole the election. You don't think he incited that at all?
No, I mean, I think you may think that he's incorrect in saying that, but I don't think voicing an opposition to the way that the election played out constitutes criminal incitement. I think that's First Amendment protected speech. And if he actually did believe that it was stolen, which he absolutely did believe it, even if
Not
you
according to
don't believe
people,
it.
not according to Hutchinson and people that have testified on the record through the January 6th committee saying that Donald Trump admitted that he knew he did not win the election.
Well, I mean, I would say that's ridiculous. And there are a lot of problems in there with a lot of the testimony. They didn't, there's a reason, that's the other thing. They didn't allow for any cross-examination of any of these people in the committee. Again, we can get into a lot of the problems with the committee itself and how they didn't really ask the questions that needed to be asked. They called in people who had kind of personal vendettas against the president.
I
But
understand that. I know that there are members of the committee and you believe that they're all anti-Trump. I get that point that you're making.
but let's just go back to the idea that to say that and this gets back maybe to the purposes of why January 6th was allowed to happen and perhaps why it was even sort of instigated to happen. And it does, in some measure, touch upon the question of the 2020 election and whether it's appropriate to basically publicly question certain aspects of it.
So let me ask
And
you, do you think it's okay to question it? But when you say Democrats cheated and I won the election in a landslide, with all due respect, that's not questioning an election. That's lying. I mean, you still believe that Trump won the 2020 election? Because I got to be honest with you, if you do, that's absolutely absurd.
well, now we're kind of shifting issues. We're getting,
Well, this is the
you
whole
know,
issue because January 6th doesn't happen if Donald Trump doesn't lie and say the election was stolen. With all due respect, January 6th does not happen if Donald Trump he's not just questioning. I agree with you. Questioning is okay. Al Gore questioned the election. That's fair. He can do that. But when you say Democrats cheated and Joe Biden lost and I won in a landslide, that's not questioning.
okay, well, I mean, the way I see it, I think there are two separate issues logically. There's one question as to litigate whether or not 2020 was stolen. That's really not my place to do here, to talk about here. But there's a separate question, and my position is it's a separate question,
Mhm.
whether advancing the notion that 2020 was stolen is ipso facto incitement from a legal perspective. And I would say that's absolutely false.
It's difficult to prove. I agree with you on that. It would be very
Well, I mean,
difficult
incitement
to
is a
prove.
legal concept, and if you're saying that's incitement, that means basically that questioning the results of 2020 election is not First Amendment protected speech.
Again,
And I
we're
think we're
going
getting
into
into very bizarre territory if that is
understood.
indeed your position.
Understood, but I think there's a difference between questioning and then saying you won in a landslide and Democrats cheated. I think that's an attack on our
Well,
democracy.
saying cheated, I mean, this is, people forget because of the obsession with Trump, people forget just how commonplace this type of rhetoric really is in our politics. In fact, one thing I cover in the introduction forward to the Skyhorse version of the J6 report,
Mhm.
Benny Thompson himself, and he's not alone. He said, Bush cheated, Bush stole the election. Hillary Clinton was saying that Trump stole the election in
Hillary Clinton
2016.
conceded the following morning, and we didn't have a Democratic insurrection. So I think that's a very false analogy that you're trying to make.
Well, it's not a false analogy because you're suggesting that saying an election was stolen constitutes incitement. And I'm saying this is a very common feature of our political
Well,
rhetoric.
I look at Donald Trump's behavior that day. For 5 hours, he's sitting at the dining room table looking at a television, doing absolutely nothing. Basically, everybody in his administration, maybe not you, but everybody in his administration told him to put out a video and say, stop the violence, stop the violence. He didn't want to do it, and it took him 5 hours to do so because I think he enjoyed what took place on January 6th. People died that day. Hillary Clinton's not responsible for a Democratic insurrection where people died.
Well,
But I want to
now we're getting to be psychologists, but I thought we were addressing the legal question of whether saying the 2020 election was stolen constitutes incitement. I'm saying if that's your position, that's a very left field type position because it would mean that questioning the election is not First Amendment protected speech, which actually is kind of where all of this is going, in the aftermath of.
But from a legal perspective, if Donald Trump isn't saying for months before January 6th that Democrats cheated, and if he's not saying that Joe Biden lost and I won in a landslide, January 6th doesn't happen. We'll let the legal ramifications pan out. I get your point. I want to give you an opportunity, sir, to comment on this.
Mhm.
You know what you tweeted on January 6th. You made some tweets. You declared that various Black individuals and groups learn their place and take a knee to MAGA. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that. Why did you make those tweets? What did you mean by that when you said learn your place and take a knee to MAGA in referring to these Black individuals like Tim Scott and others?
Well, Tim Scott has got a lot of problems. I mean, this is a separate question. Maybe I can come out later and we can litigate the Tim Scott issue. I think, a lot of people promote him. I think he's up to no good. He's what people call a
I understand,
rhino.
but I'm not asking you your
Not
personal
about
feelings on
it's
Tim
not
Scott.
about Black, but he
Well,
happens to
you
be.
named Kendi, Kate Coles, James, BLM, and Tim Scott. They all happen to be Black, and you told
Well,
them learn your place and take a knee to MAGA. I'm asking you what you meant by learn your place and take a knee to MAGA.
Well, they need to learn their place as in the sense that, they're not representing what they claim to be representing. And the idea, I see people try to do this in hit pieces and things. It's very selective because they're just so. I was saying a bunch of people should take a knee. I said the FBI should take a knee. I mentioned a lot of different people, but the hit pieces just select the people who happen to be Black on that and think, try to make it a racial thing, which it wasn't. I mentioned a lot of people and institutions that I think were doing a very bad job, including the FBI. And basically, it wasn't meant to be entirely serious. I'm not
I'll take you
expecting
for your
them to
word.
take a knee to MAGA, but
Understood. I'll take you for your word on that. But you did talk about hit pieces in Revolver. You've written articles and you put articles out there about Hunter Biden's laptop and alleged sources that say that he was having sex with underage women. Wouldn't you consider that to be exactly what you're talking against, which would be a hit piece?
well, I mean, it matters if things are true, the narratives are true. I don't know about the underage, but I think we've found that there are a lot of bizarre materials in the Hunter laptop. And if you've been following the Twitter files issue, it's a remarkable thing. Like, frankly, as far as the contents of Hunter's laptop, it's really not an obsession of mine. We ran like maybe one piece on it. I know a lot of the conservative media is obsessed with it. I think it's important, but more important than that, I think, is the meta issue of just how the reporting on this topic became a subject of really troubling censorship. And we learned from some of the Twitter files how government institutions engaged with the leadership of Twitter. And they basically acknowledged in these internal communications that the story did not violate their terms of service. They came up with this weird thing that it was of Russian provenance, which turned out to be false.
I
And
understand
they
that, but
censored
that's
this
not.
critical story just days before a presidential election. Now, that's a big problem.
I understand, but I'm just specifically talking about you. You're speaking out against hit pieces. I don't want to see hit pieces on the left or the right. But again, I'm going back to what I just said. You put out an article on Revolver talking about an alleged source that says Hunter Biden was having sex with underage women. There is no proof that that exists. Why don't you own that? And why don't you admit that that's a hit piece?
Well, I mean, I'd like to see the exact language that you're pulling on from there.
It's an article
In terms
that
of,
was in your article. You know exactly what article I'm
no, I
talking
mean, if
about.
you have it up, you should read the exact language.
I mean, I have it right in front of me here. If you want me to go through it, we don't have a lot more time, but you know exactly the article I'm talking about. You interviewed
Well, I
someone.
know we did it, but I don't know if we directly said that Hunter was having sex with underage girls.
The
I don't
source
think we made
claimed to
that
have seen
accusation.
inappropriate photos of underage girls on Hunter Biden's laptop. I
Okay,
apologize for
so
mischaracterizing that.
yeah.
That is the
And
language
there
that was used.
probably, you know what? There probably were. I haven't seen the full laptop, but there probably were. I don't see anyone denying that. There's definitely what we would call, I'm not, some big prude, but I
Right.
think most people would consider some of the material in Hunter's laptop to be inappropriate. And if it
How do
weren't
you know
considered,
what's on?
let me
How do
ask
you
you
know
this.
what's?
Let me
Yeah,
ask you this. If
sure.
it weren't considered inappropriate, why did the government and the big tech companies go to such great lengths to censor any reporting on it
I'll tell
if
you
it
why.
was so appropriate?
I'll tell you why. What I believe, a lot of the
Okay.
reporting was not correct. A lot of people have these sources. You have a source you claimed that claims that there were inappropriate
Do you
photos of
think that it
underage
comes
girls.
from Russian? Do you think it's the product of Russian hacking? Like
No, I
the
don't think I don't think it's the product of Russian hacking,
so
although
where do
we
you think it
don't.
comes from? You think the laptop is faked?
I didn't say the laptop was fake,
So
but there's a
so
fact.
what about it the story is false? Like people have
You
the hard
don't.
drive.
Where is your evidence that there were inappropriate photos of underage girls on Hunter Biden's laptop? You have some alleged source that tells you that. You print that. You do an article about it. That is, to me, the exact definition of a hit piece, something that you just spoke against when people were writing about you with these tweets on Twitter. I'm
Well,
willing to believe you that you're not a racist, even though you've hung out with plenty of white nationalists. Isn't that why Donald Trump fired you the first time?
well, that was a big hit piece. That was a big hit
Okay, well,
piece.
there you go. I'm defending you. I don't like hit pieces. Why are you doing the exact same thing on Revolver?
Well, as far as I know, that piece is perfectly sound. And if you want to go back and look at some of the pieces, I wasn't thinking we're going to talk about Hunter's laptop here, but if you want to talk about that, go and look at some of the images that are proven to have been on that hard drive. And I think any reasonable person would come to the conclusion that they might be inappropriate. Again, this isn't my big issue. I'm not the prude saying Hunter this, Hunter that. We ran like one, maybe two pieces on it total. I think the censorship of it is actually a bigger story than the substance of the laptop itself.
Well, he's a private
But
citizen, and I really don't. If he's hanging out with hookers and doing drugs, which clearly he has done in the past, he's a private citizen, and I don't know why so many Republicans are obsessed about that.
well,
But
I'll tell you the reason for that. Again, there's moralism involved, and that's not really my angle.
right,
I think the angle that a lot of people are concerned about, though, is if you have highly objectionable and sensitive material in your laptop like that, and you happen to be the son of the vice president or the president, that's a liability in terms of leverage. And if
hmm
foreign agencies get a hold of it, or even domestic groups get a hold of it, they could potentially use that to control you or control your father if your father happens to be the vice president or the
sure,
president.
sure.
And that could be a problem. And that's why, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people, the whole process of obtaining a security clearance involves sort of
Yep.
questions about this type of activity, not because they're moral scolds, but because they're concerned about
Yeah.
the liabilities from that
So,
sort of
Darren, I
national
agree with
security
you.
point of view.
Darren, I want to be very clear on this. I agree with you. But until there are laws put in place that's saying a kid can't take advantage of who their father is or their mother is, then I don't see anything illegal that Joe
Well,
Biden did.
there are actually laws about this, and there are all kinds of disclosure requirements. There are reporting requirements. If
Right.
you're
If it affects
acting
national
on behalf of
security,
foreign
absolutely.
governments, you have to register for FARA. There are actually a lot of laws that govern this,
I
and
understand you're right when it comes to our national security, but I don't see anything that rises to that level with what Hunter Biden did. Same thing with the Trump family. As you know, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, they made a lot of money, and this is proven, by the way, when Donald Trump was president. I don't. Sorry about that. I don't like that. Okay, but until there are laws put in place, and until I see actual proof that Joe Biden broke the law or Hunter Biden, listen, he's being investigated right now, Hunter Biden, for tax fraud. Other than that, I don't think there's any other investigations going on when it comes to Hunter Biden. Am I wrong on that?
I mean, to be honest, it's really not an issue I care about tremendously. The
Oh,
Hunter
okay.
issue,
Okay.
I think the January 6th issue, the
Right.
Fedsurrection, that's really more my
Understood.
métier, as they say, and that's what I've
Understood. And
done
I know you have a
extensive
new book
reporting
out,
on.
which understood. And I know you have a new book out. We have a few more minutes here, which I certainly want you to talk about, and we can go back to January 6th. My point is very, very simple. I think we can agree.
I mean, I'm sorry, can I just interject really quickly? I'm just
Sure.
curious.
Sure.
Have you seen the video compilations of figures like Ray Epps?
I've seen conspiracy theories. I've seen videos of conspiracy theorists. I've also seen a lot of people shouting, "Hang Mike Pence." I've seen officers almost, getting some of their eyes attempted to get gouged out. I've seen, a woman was trampled and died that day. I saw 600 to 700 idiots go in there and, defecating on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Those were despicable people. I would hope that we could agree on that, and they should have never gone in there. And I agree with you when you're talking about security. Fair point you make. But don't you think those people should be held to account for what they did that day? Why are so many Republicans out there defending them?
Well, I mean, there are people that I think behaved in a manner that was unlawful. And to the extent that that occurred, I think there should be some punishments. I think contextually, though, when you compare the punishments that the January 6th people received to, say, the people involved in the Black
Yep.
Lives Matter and Antifa protests, I think there's a little bit of a mismatch there. And also, I
Can
think
I
some of
respond to
the
that? I'm sorry to interrupt you,
sure,
but I want to
yeah.
respond to what you just said because I think it's very, very important. There is a mismatch. Tens of millions of people protested peacefully during the Black Lives Matter protests. There was a small percentage of people that did some very bad things. I've never heard one Democrat that said violence is great, light things on fire, attack police officers.
Well, they
It's
called it
horrible.
peaceful protests when cities were burning down.
I understand.
I mean,
Tens
there
of
are a
more.
ton of property. If you compare the property damage and the lives lost of the BLM protests, especially the property damage, it's not even a comparison. And
Here's
so
where
again, like
so hold on, let's talk about that. As I was finishing, you're right, it's not a comparison. Tens of millions of people were protesting peacefully for equality. I was one of them. You had people protesting in Washington, D.C., with all due respect, on a lie. Donald Trump saying he won the election, attacking our democracy. Now, I don't condone violence, but I don't know why every single time I have conversations with Trump supporters about January 6th, they want to bring up something completely different, which is Black Lives Matter. I don't understand that, sir.
well, I mean, the reason that I bring that up is to say I'm not excusing per se the unlawful behavior on January 6th. And
Who's
I think,
excusing BLM violence? Who's doing that?
well, the Justice Department,
No, they didn't.
insofar
You know how
as
many people were arrested?
we're
No, they're not.
seeing a lot more draconian approach to January 6th has the largest dragnet, the largest systematic DOJ prosecution in history.
Who lit something on fire with evidence and the DOJ said, "Oh, we're not going to arrest you"? I don't know what you're talking about.
There are
Thousands of people
tons.
were behind bars for what took place during
No,
those protests.
no. I mean, there were some people, but a lot of them not. A lot of them just got out the next day. I
Give
mean,
me
again,
one name of
this
one.
is very well
All
documented.
right, well, give me one name of one person that lit stuff on fire or attacked a police officer that was out the next day. Do you have one name for me?
Well, I mean, I have no names. I have broad
You don't.
statistics on it.
Okay.
And, if so, maybe you don't agree, that you don't think that there's a difference in treatment, or maybe you think that for whatever reason, the system
No, let me be very clear. Anybody who committed violence, who attacked a police officer, I want them arrested, and I want them the highest extent of the law.
Okay, but my real point is not about BLM and
Well,
Antifa,
you brought
although
it
I
up, not
think,
me. You brought it up.
well, I know, but I was building up to something else, and we
Understood.
kind of got sidetracked in that.
Sure.
And so, people can look that up and determine for themselves if they think that BLM and Antifa got an easy treatment there. But my real point that I was leading up to is that, leaving that issue aside, some of the most egregious participants in January 6th have received lenient, if not zero, repercussions as compared to people with, I think, comparatively trivial offenses.
Yeah.
And a pattern of this happening is what initially kind of tipped me off to the notion that there could be something darker here, and that there could be a running theme of provocateurs, key provocateurs who played pivotal roles at decisive moments, who created those preconditions for the rally to turn into a riot. And I think there are a handful of people that I cover extensively, including documented video footage. So people don't have to take my word for it. They can go and look at these things
There might
and
have been
see.
some. I hear you, my friend, but I think the
Yeah,
biggest provocateur of them all was the man that you worked for, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. Because if he didn't lie about the election being stolen in 2020, January 6th never happens. But unfortunately, we're out of time, my friend. But I would love to have this. I love these types of conversations, to be honest with you, my man. And I would love for you
great.
to come on again. And we can probably get into a lot of issues. We might disagree, but hopefully we can do it respectfully. And your new book out, right? The January 6th report, the report of the select committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. I apologize, Darren, for the technical issues we had earlier. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to have you to come back on. I love these discussions. I think
Sure.
Americans need to have more of them, even if we disagree. And I do appreciate you coming on, sir. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. All right.